despite warnings of retaliation from some political leaders in Canada and other countries. U.S. businesses dependent on the imports have also raised concerns, but Trump says his plans will boost domestic production. He warned that there would be no exceptions, saying he was simplifying the rules, which are set to come into effect on March 12. The U.S. is the world's largest importer of steel, counting Canada, Brazil, and Mexico as its top 3 suppliers. Meanwhile, Italian police have launched a series of raids targeting mafia clans operating in and around the Sicilian capital, Palermo. More than 1,200 officers were involved in the operation, which the military Carabinieri force said was aimed at dismantling the area's mafia. The raids, the biggest for several years, were seen as a bid by Italian authorities to stop the mafia from rebuilding its governing body. Although many mobsters are in jail, the Carabinieri said they had succeeded in smuggling tiny mobile phones into their cells in an attempt to continue their criminal activities. In a tragic development, militia fighters killed at least 55 civilians in an attack on a cluster of villages and a camp for displaced people in northeastern Congo. Violence has surged across eastern Congo, where conflict has raged for decades. More than 120 armed groups are fighting in the region, most for land and control of mines with valuable minerals, while some are trying to protect their communities. Armed men from the Codeco militia attacked the Jaiba group of villages, which is also home to a camp for the displaced. In the province of Ituri on Monday night, according to Antoinette Nzali, the leader of the camp, she said 55 civilians died, but added that the death toll is likely higher as bodies continue to be retrieved from the burned-down houses. The United Nations has said some of these attacks could constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, Tigran Gambarian, a Binance executive held in detention for 8 months in Nigeria, has revealed some diplomatic moves behind his release, particularly how the president demanded appreciation from the American government as a condition to free him. A few months after Mr. Gambarian's release, the Binance official told Wired, an American bi-monthly magazine, he learned the statement of appreciation by then-President Joe Biden-led White House, praising President Tinubu for releasing him on humanitarian grounds was part of the deal to secure his release. Citing sources familiar with the diplomatic moves and power play behind his release, the US-based magazine revealed that President Tinubu's desperation to meet former U.S. President Joe Biden at the United Nations General Assembly partly influenced the release of Mr. Gambarian last October. President Tinubu's desperation to meet former President Biden, as reviewed by Wired, came a few months after People's Gazette exclusively reported that the Nigerian president hired lobbyists in the U.S. to help convince lawmakers and policymakers that he carries acceptable personal probity to lead Nigeria, after suffering a reputational hit that followed reports of his involvement in illicit drug peddling and certificate fraud. You will also recall that in February 2023, the Gazette reported how Mr. Gambarian and Nadeem Anjawala were lured into the National Security Advisor NSA Nuhu Ribadu's office for a meeting and were later detained on the accusation that Binance was sabotaging Nigeria's currency. Meanwhile, some members of the Senate Committee on Tertiary Institutions and TET Fund have confirmed receiving $1,000 as appreciation money amid allegations that the National Assembly extorted federal universities to approve their 2025 budgets. Speaking to a publication, the lawmakers admitted to receiving the money in envelopes, but claimed they were unaware of its source until the reports exposed the scheme. Earlier, an investigation revealed that the Senate and House Committees on Tertiary Education had demanded 8 million naira from each federal university, coercing vice chancellors into paying a total of 480 million naira. Those who refused were reportedly threatened with political consequences. A senator from the committee, who spoke anonymously, said most members were kept in the dark about the scheme, with only chairpersons, deputies, and clerks controlling operations. The report further exposed how lawmakers allegedly extorted 528 million naira from 66 polytechnics and colleges of education, demanding payment in exchange for passing their budgets. Meetings were held in January where the Senate and House committees allegedly instructed the rectors and provosts to pay 8 million naira per institution, with payments made in cash to avoid traceability. Despite these revelations, the National Assembly has denied the allegations. However, sources indicate that lawmakers are now attempting to discredit the investigation while using legislative threats to silence vice chancellors. President Bola Tinubu has instructed all ministers within his administration to promptly provide a report on their performance to Nigerians. The Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, conveyed this presidential directive during a press conference held in Abuja today. He announced that all ministers are directed to periodically present updates to the media regarding their activities and policies. He noted that these briefings will provide a platform for ministers to engage directly with Nigerians, showcase significant advancement within their ministries, and respond to public inquiries. The minister further indicated that other ministers would rotate weekly to communicate with Nigerians as part of the ongoing ministerial press briefings. These press briefings are scheduled in anticipation of the second anniversary of President Tinubu's administration, underscoring the government's dedication to keeping citizens informed about its programs and policies. The Central Bank of Nigeria has eliminated the 3 free monthly withdrawals previously allowed for customers using other banks' ATMs. In a circular dated February 10, 2025, the Apex Bank directed all banks and financial institutions to implement the new ATM withdrawal charges from March 1, 2025. This means customers will now pay for every withdrawal made from another bank's ATM. The review affects the charges prescribed in Section 10.7 of the CBN Guide to Charges by Banks, Other Financial and Non-Bank Financial Institutions 2020. The circular, which was signed by John Onoja, Acting Director of the Financial Policy and Regulation Department at the CBN, is expected to accelerate the deployment of ATMs across the country while ensuring that financial institutions apply appropriate charges for the service. The House of Reps today directed the Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy, as well as the Nigerian Communications Commission (NCC), to suspend the planned increase in telecommunication tariffs until service quality improves. The decision followed the motion of urgent public importance sponsored by Oboji Ofoji, representing PDP Bayelsa State, on the need to halt the proposed tariff hike by telecom companies. Leading the debate, Ofoji recalled the announcement by the Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy, Dr. Bosun Tijani, regarding an impending increase in telecommunication tariffs. He noted that telecom operators have been advocating for a tariff hike for over 11 years. However, the National Association of Telecom Subscribers rejected the proposed increase, describing it as insensitive and an additional burden on consumers already grappling with economic hardship and poor service delivery. You are currently listening to the World News at 6 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. We're now going to the news analysis segment, and joining me to speak on issues on the World News at 6 this evening, I have legal luminary Barrister Fred Nzako. Thank you so much for joining me, Barrister, and good evening.
Good evening. Good to be with you.
Good to have you here, Barrister. Thank you so much. So there was a revelation from People's Gazette which stated that one of the conditions for the release of the detained Binance executive who was in Nigeria for 8 months, detained by the Office of the National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, one of the conditions was for former U.S. President Joe Biden to actually write and thank President Tinubu for releasing the Binance executive on humanitarian grounds, right? Do you see any credibility in this report? I mean, why would President Tinubu have to do that? So I want to know if you see any credibility at all in this report, and why would President Tinubu seek validation from the Biden administration?
Well, in international relations and in international diplomacy, there's what we call the doctrine of reciprocity, whereby any country that is a friendly country, when they do good to you, you may, on account of such doctrine and morality, return the good that they have done to you. It is very robust, especially between advanced countries and less developed countries that are usually always asking for one form of aid or grant or the other from the advanced countries. So it is not out of place that President Bola Tinubu would honor the request by President Joe Biden to release the Binance executive because the general impression was that he was being held in very bad custody and without any major reason, because it was very preposterous and very curious that Nigeria will be blaming another organization that does not even have its base in Nigeria for the downturn in our economic systems and in our finances. So it was expected that government should look into that, because more or less the Binance executive saw themselves as victims of wrong government policy, or victims of wrong perception of what they represent, and they had to cry out to their country for succor. And of course, you know that somebody raised the matter on the floor of the Parliament of the United States, that a citizen of America was being held in Nigerian dungeon illegally. And that was what moved the President of America, then President Joe Biden, to make such requests from President Bola Ahmed.
So you do not believe it could have been a condition for his release? Barrister Nzako, you do not believe that that publication thanking President Tinubu could have been a condition for Tigran Gambarian's release?
Well, I do not think so. I simply do not think so. I think it was more or less a publication born out of conspiracy theory, and it is not backed by any empirical evidence or any realistic international diplomatic stance. So I don't think there's explanation.
Just yesterday, a lengthy report by Wired, I think Wired.com, they had an exclusive interview with Tigran Gambarian where he detailed everything that he endured while he was in detention in Nigeria. He also mentioned how Abba Kyari helped him survive what he called Kuje's VIP prison, right? There was a whole lot of revelation. He talked about how the Nigerian authorities were demanding about $150 million bribe from him, which was to be paid in cryptocurrency to various crypto accounts so that they could not be traced.
Draw a line of difference between what the government officially asked for and what possibly officials of government may have practically asked for. You recall that the federal government gave Binance a fine to pay a certain amount of money, running into millions of dollars, for them to receive executive release of their executives who especially one who was in prison, because the other one had voted away. Even though one, there were suspicion that some officials of government may have helped him to run away, but that's a story for another day. We are concentrating on the one that couldn't run away, the one that spent 8 months in custody. Recall that Nigerian gave a condition for the man to be released. That the activities of Binance caused a lot of financial infraction in especially with respect to our foreign exchange market, and that the activities caused obstacles to our system. And as a matter of fact, that they will pay for a kind of compensatory bill for what they have done to Nigerian economy. So if that is what they were referring to, then that was official, and then there was nothing wrong about it, because even when some prisoners are being released in some parts of the world, the countries sometimes pay some kind of fee for the release of such prisoners. So if Nigeria demanded that certain amount of money be paid for him to get his freedom, it is in line with what other international practices. But if he was referring to the private war, possibly demanded by some officers of government, that of course you cannot beat your chest and say it couldn't happen, because we know the level of corruption that pervades our land, which even the coaches of football will tell you that one of their major problems is that when they are said to be paid XYZ, that after that XYZ, the kickback that will go to some other officers of the that influence the appointment will be embedded inside that, so that whenever they refuse to pay or fail to pay, they make life bearable for them. We all know this, even though it is very terrible intents and purposes. But one cannot say it never happened because of the kind of environment that we find ourselves.
You know, in this report, it was also mentioned about how this was one tactic that the president was using to, you know, clear his image on the international scene. You recall the report in early January about paying U.S. lobbyists $2.7 million to help burnish his image destroyed by drug dealing and certificate forgery scandals.
Well, all that, again, lies in the realm of conjecture and conspiracy analysis. Nobody is certain because sometimes even the international media cannot be trusted because when they don't get certain information that they are looking for, they can cook up anything and drop it in the space.
If you say conspiracy, then who's conspiring against the president, Barrister Nzako?
And I expect the report out. I cannot speak on that because I don't know whether that happened or not.
If you say that there is a conspiracy to tarnish the president's image, then who could be responsible for that?
No, I'm not saying conspiracy to tarnish the president's image. I'm saying for anybody who is raising a conspiracy that Mr. President paid somebody to massage his international image and powder it and perfume it with certain millions of dollars. In the first instance, it is possible. In the second instance, it is also not possible. And that is where conspiracy opinion comes in. Because one is not certain whether it happened or not. And like I said, it is not everything that is said at the international forum that is correct. In some cases, a lot of them may not be correct, especially when it concerns developed countries, especially in Africa. Because the developed world will always hinge anything they imagine on Africa. Recall that even in some years past, they imagined and thought that some of us have tails. And even till today, some of their children still believe, except those of them who are exposed, that a lot of us have tails here in Africa. My friend was on a bus sometime in France. The children were gossiping with him, saying that they wanted to see him stand up to know whether he had tail actually or not. And then when he now responded to them when he was alighting from the bus, he spoke French language to them and told them that they should change, that nobody has tail as human beings. The children were shocked. So that should tell you that even in modern age, that impression, that malignant impression still pervades at the international level. So not everything they say can be taken with a pinch of salt.
All right, then. Whatever we hear from Western media, we should be taking it with a pinch of salt. All right, I want to move on in this conversation and actually talk about something else that is very, very pertinent. And that is some Nigerian senators admitting that they received quote-unquote appreciation money in the budget bribery scandal, right? Speaking to a publication, the lawmakers say, yes, they received money in envelopes, but they were unaware of the source of the money. They did not know what it was for. They just believed that it was actually appreciation money. The National Assembly is actually being accused of extorting federal universities before approving their 2025 budget, right? And the allegations are that an investigation revealed that the Senate and the House Committee on Tertiary Education demanded 8 million naira from each federal university vice chancellor to pay a total of 480 million naira before the budget for their schools would be approved.
If we are serious in this country, we must draw the difference between the so-called appreciation money and the so-called PR, and know that all of them are just like 6.5 dozen equal to or akin to bribery. Bribery can come in different forms. It can be before the action, it can be after the action. It can even be many, many days after the action. It can even come in kind. Anything that somebody earns or receives that is inordinate wants to bribery. So it doesn't mean that bribery must precede the action. Bribery can come after the action. There could be pre-action bribery, there could be in-action bribery, and there could be post-action bribery. They are all bribery. There's no difference between 6.5 dozen. So whether you call it appreciation money or you call it PR, you are taking bribe. And until we know that a governor in another country was removed for flying on a ticket bought by a citizen, And the governor had to pay for it with his seat because they felt that that amounted to a compromise. A president in another country went to a theater to watch a film on account from the taxpayers' money, and he had to answer for it. We have to know that in another country, a governor was punished severely for utilizing public funds just to send his child to school. But down here, we sweep everything under the carpet and feel that now Oyibo time it happen. That's no Oyibo culture. Democracy is international. Governance is international. Humanity is universal. What is good in America, in Germany, in Britain is also good in Nigeria. And that is why when Nigerians go to those places, they flourish. Why wouldn't we make our environment enough and good enough for us to flourish?
How can we make
it make us flourish?
Okay.
To ensure that all those incidences of backhand dealings are eliminated, most especially at the public sector level.
Barrister Fred Nzako, one would continue to ask and look at the indices on why the senators would actually say to these polytechnics and universities, the vice chancellor saying, you have to pay us money before we can pass your budget. Could it be because they found loopholes in such budgets? Could it be that most of those budgets were overinflated and they could see that this vice chancellor or this school, they're asking for more than they need? Is it that they've seen that, okay, if we approve this budget, it may be embezzled and then they want to get their cut? What really is it? Because this investigation further highlights how about 66 polytechnics and colleges of education paid 528 million to senators, and the senators actually threatening them, saying if you speak or if you do not give us this money, we'll frustrate you and then we'll just cook up charges against you. What does that tell us about the National Assembly?
Anybody who wants to take bribe will always have reason to take bribe. And will always have reason to ask for it. You recall the case of Farouk Lawan in the House of Press, with first of all with Mr. Femi Otedola, whereby Otedola set up a trap and the trap caught him, where he was demanding for bribe. He actually demanded and received $620,000 as chairman of a particular committee that was looking into the affairs that involved the Zenon oil. Then Farouk Lawan went to prison. He just came out last year. So that simply tells you that the people who say that that bribe was demanded from them may not exactly be wrong. Look at the reasons why we don't fully implement our budget in Nigeria. It's because of some of these issues, whereby if you don't rub their back, they will not rub your back. If you don't provide more money to them, they will not approve your expenditure. Even in some cases, and even at the level of the central bank, where they're supposed to release those funds, we also hear some people in central bank will demand and receive bribe before the money is released. They do so in Ministry of Finance and in most other places that have authority to release funds. And why we say all this is for government to wake up and look deep into all these things and stop them, because they are all indices of corruption. And it does not help the country in any way. There is no environment that thrives in such massive corruption that we have in Nigeria. So if you ask an average Nigerian will want to believe those vice chancellors and those who allege that they were asked to bring money than the people who were denying.
Why do you think that is the case?
That practice, because that practice is pervading in the Nigerian environment.
While we're talking about this, Barrister Fred Nzako, because of our time, I want to quickly talk about President Tinubu ordering his ministers to give Nigerians a performance report. It will soon be 2 years into this administration, and before then, he would love the ministers to actually brief Nigerians on what they've been doing to make the people's lives better. Do you think they would actually have anything to show? Because in his last media chat, and the president asked the question, is there any of my ministers that's not performing? And picked all of them. They're all effective. They're all efficient, right? If Nigerians are not seeing the impact of these ministers and the administration of how they are administering their ministries, what exactly do they want to show Nigerians in this performance briefing?
Well, one, first and foremost, salute Mr. President for giving Nigerians such hope that he will ask his ministers to come and give an account of their stewardship. That's a good way to go, and we expect that the ministers will really come and tell Nigerians what they have done. But we must warn that they should not tell lies, and they should take away propaganda and tell Nigerians realistically what they have achieved, because we know that many of them have not been performing well. And it is on account of the failure of many of them to perform well that made Nigerians to ask Mr. President to rejig his cabinet, which he did some months ago. But unfortunately, we made Nigerians suspected that the size of the cabinet would be reduced, but rather we saw it further bloated by 2 extra hands. But be that as it may, the issue is have all the ministers performed, and what is the criteria, or what are the criteria of assessment? But it is also good that Mr. President has said so, because Nigerians themselves are laid back when it comes to assessing the officers they have put in power. They are put in positions of responsibility. Yes, we elected Mr. President who appointed the ministers, but by extension, the ministers are serving the people. So by extension, the people appointed them, because they were appointed by the representative of the people who was elected as the president. So it is good that the president has said so, and we expect that Nigerians should articulate what their expectations, and then watch and wait to hear what the ministers will say. And like I earlier said, is an early warning to those ministers and their PR handlers and their communication handlers to ensure that they do not model up reality with propaganda or tell lies just to make the ministers look good. Those who are performing, even without them presenting their scorecard, Nigerians know them. So if any non-performing one comes out to begin to polish his performance, we are bellied with all manner of falsehood, I think Nigerians will have an opportunity to ask questions. And then if such questions become very strong enough, the ministers may themselves be in hot soup because Nigerians will ask Mr. President to drop them for brandishing falsehood in the face of reality.
Thank you so much, Barrister Fred Nzako. It's always a pleasure whenever we get to have these conversations with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Have an amazing evening.
Many thanks.
You have been listening to the World News at 6 right here on Voice of the People 90.3 FM. Just before we wrap up, let's take a look at the top stories again. You heard that a report has revealed that President Tinubu begged Joe Biden to praise him as a condition for freeing Binance executive. Nigerian senators admit receiving appreciation money in budget bribery scandal. CBN scraps free ATM withdrawals for other banks' customers. And on the foreign scene, Trump says no exemptions with metal tariffs to start in March. And that is a wrap on the World News at 6. My name is Chioma Innocent. Good evening and thank you for listening.